7:38. This is Breakfast with Stephen and Anne. We're on your TV, we're online, on your radio as well. Good morning to you.
Yes, very good morning to you. Should we take a look at today's newspapers?
Oh, yes. I hate this headline in the Metro.
Yes, it doesn't work, does it? Grounded Hog Day for Rishi. Why don't they just put Groundhog Day?
Yeah.
Then we'd have got it, because it really did feel like a Groundhog Day, Rishi, having to face all these problems yet again. Judges concluding that Rwanda is not, at the moment, safe enough for Channel migrants to be sent there.
The Mail has that story as well, but it says we should decide who comes here, not criminal gangs.
And then big news for the NHS this morning. That's in the Daily Express. They're leading with Rishi's radical plan to fix the NHS once and for all.
OK, let's go through some of those then. With author Nikki Hodgson and co-founder of the Together Association, Alan Miller. Morning to you both.
Morning.
Nikki, we're going to talk about betting and Betfair in particular on the Times.
Yes, there's been lots in the news recently about gambling. We've talked recently about gambling regulation. Are the regulations too loose in terms of protecting people that've got actual gambling problems? And this is about the very sad story of Luke Ashton, who he took his own life because he'd lost thousands of pounds gambling with Betfair. Now, Betfair claims it has an algorithm which it uses to detect problem gamblers. So basically, if you bet and lose thousands of pounds in a very short space of time, which is what happened to Luke Ashton, then it should pick you up, and then it should basically block your account and send you various bits of information to try and help you. That didn't happen. So his family have kind of said, it's just not good enough, basically. You can't just say you've got an algorithm to help people when it clearly didn't work in the case of Luke. So, I mean, there's been an inquest, basically, about his death, so this is how it's kind of come about. It's got to be not that difficult to surely see when somebody is splashing ridiculous amounts of money in a short space of time. It's surely got to ping up. I mean, I don't really understand what's going on here. I mean, is it an oversight in this particular case, or is it that the system isn't good enough to start with? Because nobody benefits ultimately when somebody dies in this kind of way.
They don't, but are we running the risk? And I am concerned that there's a constant idea that everyone's vulnerable. No one has the capacity to get control over a situation. The terms like addiction just present us as though somehow it's completely out of control, and it's the responsibility of companies increasingly to make sure and mitigate issues of our own agency. And I do worry, we're not talking about children. I do worry that we get into a situation, and we've seen it across the board, not just with discussions around alcohol, we see it discussions around food, we see it with discussions about lifestyle generally, and particularly gambling. And it just seems that there's a massive amount of regulation and concern around the idea that we are all vulnerable and susceptible.
Well, Alan, on a level we are, because the way the brain works is that if you have either a food or a drink or an activity that spikes dopamine at a level that is kind of unnatural, which is what these kinds of technologies and gambling machines do, then there is a risk that you can become addicted. That's how we work biologically.
Well, there's always risks of everything, but I'm talking about human agency and the ability for humans to be able to mitigate those things.
But not all humans can. And
well, that's a big debate.
We always believe there are some people in society that believe they'll never be addicts, and that just isn't true. Everybody can become an addict to something in the right or wrong circumstances. The point about this technology...
And when you're addicted to things... You just made a few points, but when you're addicted to things, it could be smoking or all sorts of other things. You also have the propensity and capacity to stop it.
Well, that's very debatable. That's completely debatable, Alan. Lots of scientists will absolutely disagree with you on that.
When you're a real addict, and as bad as he was, I don't know whether you do. I think probably by
there's a point at which you go past being able to control. Exactly.
And saying to an
that's
alcoholic,
medical. That's not me just saying. That's not me just pulling it out from thin air. That is what doctors and psychiatrists agree on.
The thing with Betfair is, even if their algorithm had worked properly, what would they have done about it?
Well, that's the interesting bit,
just
isn't it?
Cutting him off from gambling. Surely he would have just gone somewhere else. I completely agree with you on that. So, what is the system that we have in place for spotting people that do have a problem? I do understand what you're saying about it shouldn't be the responsibility alone of the companies, but we've got to come up with a better strategy.
We're often told things like the science says, and doctors say, and experts say.
Sure.
That we hide behind things like the evidence says,
rather than hundreds of years of
scientific evidence.
Hold on. Rather than making the explanation and the example and giving evidence about things or making a political claim, I'm making the point that in the discussions around adults and choices, increasingly we have regulation, we have interventions around the idea that we're all susceptible and vulnerable and almost like we're children. And I'm saying that's problematic.
But we're basing this on the science, Alan, like hundreds of years of research into psychiatry and the synapses of the brain. Is that what you're disputing, that scientists are wrong about that?
Well, hang on a minute. If we go on to the next story that you wanted to talk about, I mean, some people, and we've been talking about this a bit, are hooked on and actually addicted to excitement and experimental adventure.
Yes. It's a fantastic story, Anne.
This is Virgin Galactic.
Virgin Galactic has done a history-making thing yesterday because it has finally taken up, Richard Branson's company has finally taken up the first fee-paying person to be the first tourist in space. In fact, it's 3 Italian pilots and an aeronautical engineer with the 2 co-pilots of the Virgin Galactic. I must say I've got a bit of an interest in this story as well because although these charges are very expensive, $450,000 per person, they've sold 800 tickets. Before the lockdowns, I was actually involved in a project to do a 4-part documentary series on this, right? I think it's fascinating and exciting. It is interesting at the end, your point about addiction and adrenaline-driven things and billionaires. I think we've got a bit of a dystopian view about some of this. I think this is fantastic. Like we've seen with Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, this attempt to go to the future, like NASA used to do, the space race, and also create things in society. But they reference what was the tragedy of the Titan submarine. It is interesting, though, as well, isn't it, that the Titan submarine CEO was he was saying that he wasn't going to recruit certain people like 50-year-old white men who had military experience because he thought that was a bit all passé and old and not having rigorous standards. Virgin Galactic has had issues along the way. They've had some tragedies.
Yes.
But the thing about the pioneering spirit for searching and discovery and going beyond boundaries is that we aspire and do things. And as our view about the future and about our potential is important, because I think a lot of the time is how we see ourselves in space is also how we see ourselves here.
Yeah, but there's a big differential there between that pioneering spirit and things which are I would say, absolutely crucial, and the work that NASA does and that all these private companies are doing now. But there's a big difference between that and pushing it on the tourism side. I mean, that's what we saw with the Titan. It's all about the tourism.
When the professionals do it, they've often put their whole lifetime's work into achieving it. But if you're just doing it because you've got the money to do it, you are essentially an excitement tourist, and that is an adrenaline-based thing. That is an addiction for many. Is that morally right?
Well, it's really good, isn't it? Because the question is really profound. Because would we have had Columbus going across the blue? Although the Vikings, the Chinese may well have got to what we now call the Americas. Would anyone have done anything that was dangerous? Because you could have said some of those people were addicted
but he wasn't
to
doing it for commercial
pioneering
gain.
and adventure.
But
the interesting thing about this is that we now all fly around the world. We could fly much quicker in a couple of hours to Australia if we use some of this technology. And we all have tourism that once, my grandmother took my father for months on boats when she used to go to different places. She had to go to India and elsewhere. Whereas now we can do it far quicker. That's because of the mass market in tourism and investment and innovation, and we should see that in space tourism and elsewhere as well. It's very exciting.
I'm completely pro this, by the way, because my family live in Australia, and the 26-hour flight is not something I want to do with my baby daughter at the minute for obvious reasons.
Can I just tell you that Richard Branson was promising a 2-hour
yes,
flight to
Australia
was. 30 years
Where
ago.
has it gone, though? Because I'm still waiting for it, so I can go see my family for
We'll
this
have to wait an awful lot longer. Can I just say something I'm being told, I must say, because we've been talking about the nature of gambling and addiction of various sorts. If that affects you, remember you can get to the Samaritans for free if you just call 116 123. It's really important that I say. There's also a national gambling helpline on 0808 8020 133, and if you need me to repeat those numbers, we'll put them on the website, the GBNEWS website, okay? It's important to say that.
Yes. Now let's have a look. Just a quick look at Princess Catherine in the Mail, Nikki?
Yes, Princess Catherine. So the question is always, how does she do it? She looks so glamorous and gorgeous. She has 3 children. We see her in the public eye a lot. She's always opening things. She's at events. She does all that brilliant work with the early years stuff for children. Well, the way that she appears everywhere and looks fantastic, etc., is because she only works within about a 25-mile radius. So 14 of the past events that she's done have all been very close to home. And I say, fair enough. If you've got kids, what's wrong with that?
Very clever.
Are they being critical about that?
Well, they're sort of pointing out that she doesn't go to other parts of the country, but she's allowed to choose to stay and be with her family.
She likes to be able to do the school run.
Completely.
Yeah.
So I think it's totally admirable and the right thing to do.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
don't think you can knock her for that. Alan, Nikki, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Good to see you this morning.
Congratulations on the award.
Thank you.